And the more I got immersed in the profession and the field, the more confused I got, to be honest. I have supervised up to 60 MA pieces in doctoral dissertation, all on EAP, and some publications on different aspects. But I still know nothing about EAP and the complexities of EAP, English for Academic Purposes Education. To begin with this short briefing, well, people find ESV as a well-established part, EAP as a well-established part of ESV education and a subfield of applied linguistics. Well, it boasts of being very research-oriented, very local, very pragmatic, and multidisciplinary indeed, in reality. The ESV programs are developed to accommodate the needs of non-native speakers, basically EFL speakers, who need help with language of academic disciplines based on ancestors and leading figures of the field. The bulk of EAP research has been on description of language. I mean, it began with register analysis, discourse analysis, genre analysis, critical discourse analysis, and analysis of target language needs. So the early history of ESP begins with a linguistic background, and there's no concern for education or teaching or assessment of English for academic purposes. EAP pedagogy and teaching methodology have been Cinderellas of ELT, and no much research on these areas. Quite recently, we have some studies on these aspects. Well, a quick look at EAP teaching methodology. Well, the story began with study skills. The story began with register analysis and proceeded to socialization, academic socialization, and currently multiple literacies. The journey has taken a long time, and you can find a kind of coincidence between these approaches to EAP and what happened in neighboring disciplines. I mean, psychology, education, linguistics, literacy education, and of course, politics of language and bilingualism. Just to have a short comment on one aspect of EAP methodology and how it has been influenced by the shifts in modern education. Well, when you go to the history of modern education, you find schools and trends like traditionalism, progressivism, criticism, and digitalism. In those early days of EAP, the main concern was language and academic literacy. I mean, language per se, structures, vocabularies, or formal aspects of language only. When progressivism, with emphasis on individuals, with emphasis on society, with an emphasis on academic identity construction came into the market, then the approach to EAP shifted into sort of socialization. The students were pushed into the discourse communities, I mean disciplinary discourse communities, and they were motivated to socialize, to get the norms of communication and to act and feel and think like established members of the target community. Well, this is coined with the genre studies and the recent studies on, recent extensions of genre studies. But one thing was missing in this approach. The students and the newcomers were taken as static people. They were not regarded as dynamic people. their voices were not heard, and they were not valued as, actually at times they were sidelined and downgraded as novice members, as non-proficient learners. Thanks to the wave of criticality in education coming from mid-Europe, I suppose, or West Europe, and this criticality added a new ring to EAP. So they said the students should not be taken as static people, but the methodology should be geared to educating students as thinkers, as challengers, as those who try to improve the status quo. And there's no point of established member versus novice members. So the whole methodology should be geared in such a way that students have their voices and at the same time get socialized in the target communities as well. Well, digitalism introduced a new chapter of approaches into EAP. Well, new genres came into life, new channels of communication, new rights to communicate, and questions of ethicality, questions of networking, questions of virtual learning, questions of virtual communication had an impact on EAP education. Well, today, what's actually practiced in the world is EAP education as socializing learners. I mean, criticality and digitalism has not found itself into classrooms yet, and we hope to have it in the future years to come. So EAP education today aims at education, professionalization, and identity construction of the students who want to join disciplinary communities in the future. So they have to take part in not knowledge dissemination, but even knowledge construction. So that's a utopian goal for EAP education today. How far it is realized and how far it is practical and visible, that's another question, and we should follow it up very shortly. So EAP today, as practiced in different parts of the world, seems to have taken a kind of learner-centered approach and a kind of social academic literacy approach, and a form of multiple literacies, not just literacy in the classical sense, but multiple literacy. The ambitious goals imply very skillful, very proficient teachers. The expectations are too many, and the challenges are too many. So how can we prepare such teachers? And what kind of roles should EAP teachers assume? Well, in many cases, EAP teachers have been entrapped in the technical vocabulary and language, and sometimes themes and topics of the field. In many cases, EAP teachers have evolved cognitions which are local. I searched the literature for the history of EAP teacher education and tried my best to find records of serious, systematic EAP courses, EAP teacher education courses around the world. To my great surprise, I couldn't find any single record. So it's not a matter of our context, it's not a matter of Canadian context, but it's something usual in the world. Being an ESP teacher is not an easy job. Sometimes it's a very risky job. The risk of burnout, the risk of not being appreciated by colleagues, the risk of not being familiar with the target discourse, the risk of not being familiar with the target knowledge, epistemology of the field, and too many risks on the way, as we shall see in a moment. But anyhow, the goal is to make our best to socialize the learners and to push the learners to join target community. How far we can go, it's a matter of local context and local circumstances. EAP, one easy way to compare the challenges EAP teachers might face with is to compare it with what ELT, I mean general English teachers, might face. This is the easiest way, and people say it requires more experience, additional training, extra effort, a fresh commitment compared with general English teachers. Quite recently, research has addressed the needs of ESP teachers and the multiple roles they have to assume, as I will explain in the coming slides. Well, these are the typical identity realms for EAP teachers. I mean, the roles and responsibilities they have to assume in their profession. Well, perhaps the first one and the most challenging one is to interpret the language policies and to decide on priorities. As you know, language policies are usually ambitious promises are very cheap. So when it comes to the reading context, they say we would like to enable, empower our students to be proficient in writing, proficient in speaking, to be knowledge producers in the future, and to put Iran on the scientific map in the next 10, 20 years. But when it comes to middle-level language policies, we see they're not transparent and they're not operational enough. So there's no clear database on constraints, on policies on recruiting teachers, on policies on supporting programs, funding programs, assessing programs, and so on and so forth. And when it comes to the actual classroom level, you find a huge gap between what's on the paper and what's in the real context. The students are struggling with ABCs of language, I mean language proficiency. The students are demotivated. The students are heterogeneous. The students are not very much familiar with the goals of the course. Another responsibility is to gain content and language knowledge. Both of them are dynamic things. So content, maybe I know the basics and the general core subject areas of medicine, but my students are doing research. My students are doing medicine, so they expect me to comment on the grandma's disease. Sometimes they expect me to make interpretation of a lab report. Actually, this is a fallacy, but this is what they have in mind. So language knowledge is also expanding thanks to advances in linguistics. So every day we have a new genre coming into the academic circles, into the field, into the discipline. And as a teacher, we should be very much aware of these advances. Well, being a researcher is definitely a role to be played by EAP teachers. Well, they should assess the needs of the students, and they should get into more qualitative research to understand those hidden needs. And of course, they should do discourse and genre analysis. So being a researcher is a must for ESP teachers in this slides. Also, ESP teachers should be very course designers, especially when it comes to intensive courses, especially when it comes to short-term courses. So being a course designer presupposes qualifications and skills on the part of ESP teachers. Materials development, in many cases, both in-house materials and those commercially available materials are not the best resources, and the ESP teachers should be capable of compiling materials or at least adapting materials to their own context, or sometimes supplementary materials must be added. So it's not very easy to develop materials for these programs. Another requirement on the part of ESP teachers is having the ability to collaborate and network with a good number of parties, a good number of stakeholders. Networking between content teachers and language teachers, networking between sponsors of the programs, chancellors and presidents of universities for getting funds, and even networking with target job sites to get support from them. I mean, all kinds of supports. When it comes to classroom instruction, that's again one of the big roles and the big challenges. Well, they don't like to be general English teachers. They don't like to be content teachers, but they would like to be EAP teachers, and that's very difficult to handle. Many ELD teachers forget all about teaching EAP, and they switch back to the traditional roles of English language teaching, irrespective of the context and the domain they are teaching. And assessment and evaluation of the courses and renewal of the courses, improving courses for the coming years, again, very difficult roles to play. Based on this huge job description protocol and the high expectations, I went to the literature to outline the major challenges. So most of these challenges have been experienced by me in the real context and have been identified in the local context of Iran, but a great majority of these challenges have been highlighted in the literature as international issues and problems as well. Students' low general English proficiency and low motivation is on top of the list. In a nationwide study we did many years ago, we found out that the majority of students did not meet the 20% cutoff point of English proficiency. That's a disaster. With this low threshold of English, how even magicians can't do very much and they can't teach EAP very well. Another major challenge, administrative challenge, is the support and the resources they receive. They are detached from the English language centers and English departments and content departments. So they do not receive the kind of collegial support they deserve. At times they're not valued, at times they're not appreciated by the departments. So there's not much recognition for the help, for the contribution they make, and university authorities and even colleagues do not respect them very much because they run short-term courses and they're not appreciated very much. Yes, the biggest challenge is the textbooks and materials in the EAP courses and the time pressure and the high expectations, content departments. But they say, well, we need the learners, so your job is to bridge the gap between the student's present level and the target level and standards we have already set. But how? This is the big challenge, given the time pressure and the short duration of the courses and the very slight load of English for academic purposes within the larger ELT, EFL, ESL curriculum. And very large and heterogeneous language classes. Well, the classes are too large. More technical challenges on knowledge, skills, and cognitions of EAP teachers. Well, the biggest challenge is that in majority of cases, they're not well trained and they're not well prepared for the job. They did not undergo serious training and serious education, even though pre-service, in-service short-term courses. Content teachers, insufficient English language proficiency. In majority of cases, content teachers are good candidates for running these courses, but content teachers, with the exception of those teachers who are native speakers of English, are not proficient enough. And if they are proficient enough, they do not know the discourse of the genre, the community, the field, the discipline they are studying, they are teaching. For ELT professionals, the biggest challenge is content knowledge and language knowledge of the discipline, especially when it comes to narrow-angled EAP courses. I mean, those EAP courses which are too specific in terms of students' needs and themes and topics and strategies and sub-areas of knowledge. Perhaps the biggest challenge is lack of collaboration and cooperation between content teachers and language instructors, and heavy workload and burnout. As I said, marginalization of EAP teachers and the problem of identity. These teachers do not really know what job descriptions they have and what standards of excellence they have to meet. And at times there's a contradiction between and among those roles they have to assume, as I shall elaborate in one of the studies we have done in the context of Iran. The final one, naive perceptions of teachers about the professional role identities. In a recent study we conducted, students identified themselves as providers of language input at lexical and grammatical level through translation. So you see how naive the perception of cognition is, and they need to be trained. In what follows, I have a quick look at the studies we have done in the context of Iran. I need to brief the context in very short hints. Well, in Iran we have EAP education as a big part of ELT education, usually 1-2 credit course as compulsory for all university majors. By the way, it has a long history. I mean, before the Islamic Revolution, back in late 1970s, Iran was the center of EAP education, and a good number of EAP materials were produced, and some leading figures and big names were based in Iranian universities. Since then, EAP in Iran has worked for content specificity, so the courses have become more and more discipline specific. So we have up to 9 courses for students of law, criminal law, domestic law, family law, and so on and so forth. So they found specificity in content as the major key to promotion of students' language. A very, very strange thing in the market context of Iran is that subject departments and language departments run the courses independently. There's no link at all. And usually content teachers are preferred to language teachers. And language teachers usually avoid the job because it's too difficult for them to manage. And there's no systematic teacher education, so no education at all.
For only for EAP or in general for English?
For EAP, yes, for EAP. As I said, the courses are run by ELT or content departments with no collaboration, and no teacher education, so it's not surprising to find so many fallacies on these camps of teachers. In this part, I will summarize a few studies we have done in the context of Iran, and I invite you to join the discussion. And so I'll just brief the studies. The very relevant study to the topic of this lecture is the study of critical incidents in the EAP courses. Critical incidence is a kind of ethnographic qualitative tool. We invite the students to recall and recount very decisive, very important events which happened to them retrospectively, and join in the corners aspects of that event and how that event changed their mind and mentality and what lessons they got from that event. So this is the kind of tool and measure we used in this study. The whole thing is to keep the students reflect on their action and find solutions to the problems. Or in more technical language, the whole thing is to push the students learn, teacher learning, not teacher education. To let the students learn from each other, but not to teach them, and not to train them. So in this study, we adopted a kind of a snowball sampling, and we invited students to provide us with those critical incidents through interviews. Of course, the teachers were briefed on what critical incidents are, and samples of critical incidents were presented to them. And so the questions we tried to address were the main categories of subject-related critical incidents they faced and they shared with us, and what tactics and what strategies they adopted to handle those strategies, and what good lessons they added to the repertoire of professional content knowledge and experience. As I said, we had a good population, 34 EAP instructors, and we could collect 13 subject-related critical incidents, and we analyzed them. The bulk of incidents, critical incidents, were subject knowledge incidents, even though we got some critical incidents on students' behaviors, students' proficiency, clash with superiors, and teachers' wrong or naive behavior, and teachers' unpreparedness. But our focus of the study was on the first category of incidents. This table gives a snapshot of what we found as the font is too small. Okay, I read it. The major strategy our teachers adopted was admitting ignorance. They admitted ignorance while dealing with the challenge of not knowing the subject. And they translated technical English words into Persian, and they talked to the students and asked them to help. And the lesson they got was to use the students' knowledge when their own knowledge is not adequate enough. 2 and 3, the same strategy, but different incidents. Asking for an acronym, complete form, and meaning. Talking to the students, and the lesson they got, get fully prepared beforehand. They should prepare for the lesson. And another strategy they adopted was avoidance. When it came to technical terms, teachers avoided them. And the tactic they used was distracting students' attention, or even fake headache. I have a headache today, I have no concentration, so that was the tactic they used. And sometimes risk-taking. Risk-taking means not knowing the disciplinary meaning of a word or a term, but they had the students find the answer and go to their professors and find the answers next time. And the lesson they got was go beyond understanding the literal meaning. Another example was explaining technical terms when the exact term was not available to them, and they didn't have in the dictionaries. And guessing the meaning. And the lesson they got was be flexible and ready to find a way out, to not give up and try a kind of social strategy. Okay, fine. So in this research, we found out that many teachers could handle the incidents without losing their face, as long as they were creative, and as long as they were risk takers, and as long as they have good relationship with teachers and with colleagues in content departments. In several cases, they elicited cues and hints from the students, and this meant they switched back to kind of strategies of general language education and kind of Vygotskian social strategies, kind of counseling strategies, kind of negotiation strategies. So the lesson, the ultimate lesson we got from this study was to push the students to increase the awareness of these tiny things through sharing the experiences, probably in a virtual platform when they remain anonymous and there's no risk to their privacy, and they could share these experiences very well. And I'm happy to say in a follow-up study, we did this. We designed a kind of platform in which the teachers freely uploaded their incidents, and the feedback we got was quite positive. The teachers used the incidents and they developed their professional skills. In another study, which is very relevant to this presentation, is we studied the teachers' cognitions. A qualitative study of Iranian in-service EAP teachers' cognitions. We employed interviews and narrative inquiry. We had 6 ELT teachers and 3 content instructors. The whole course was a kind of in-service course. And as I said, we adopted a kind of teacher learning rather than teacher education approach. The quick conclusion I can put in this occasion is the cognitions of teachers were not in harmony with the principles and with the nature of English for academic purposes, whether you go with traditionalism, progressivism, criticalism, or digitalism. Unfortunately, the teachers had very naive cognitions. But the good news is that, of course, we published in this part in a separate paper. The good news is that the teachers ultimately improved a lot. And when we compared the change in their cognitions, it was really astonishing. So the teacher trainer or moderator just provided a kind of supervision to the discussions and to the challenges they raised and the solutions they adopted. But at the end of the day, the teacher said, we have learned a lot, and now we are in a better position to handle the challenges of our EAP courses. In another study, which was more quantitative in nature, we probed the status of burnout among Iranian teachers, and our focus was on a comparison of content teachers and language teachers, and a few demographic variables as moderators. By demographic variables, I mean years of experience, background, education, whether ELT professionals or content specialists, and the kind of university, whether university of science, medical sciences, humanities, arts, and so on and so forth. The instrumentation was a questionnaire, and the population was very large and representative. It was taken from about 25 universities all throughout the country. And the findings confirmed that burnout was generally low among EAP teachers, but mid-levels of burnout, especially when it comes to emotional exhaustion and personal accomplishment, I mean, the kind of feeling the teachers had that they were not satisfied with the services they provided, they were not happy with the kind of teaching they had. This was at mid-level, and this brings me to a few suggestions and a few solutions, and hopefully we will have enough time to discuss things in details. The very first suggestion I have is not to go with universal one-size-fits-all jackets and models of teaching and teacher education and methodology for EAP. EAP is a highly local and pragmatic activity. So we should try to find the best fitting paradigm for screening and educating teachers. So in the context of Iran, where ELT professionals are not very much ready, or I mean, they're not volunteered to fill the positions, we have to invest on content teachers, or at least a kind of collaboration between content teachers and language teachers. As early as 2006 I presented a model. That model was specifically for the context of Iran, but maybe implications for other contexts. And that model was based on, it was not the same team teaching, traditional team teaching model, but it was a model of collaboration before classroom instruction. At classroom instruction level, depending on the specificity of the content, I proposed, I suggested either ELT teachers or content teachers to be the main role models in the classrooms, but not team teaching in the classroom to avoid the confusion and the mess. Another suggestion I have is to improve the quality of teachers' cognitions, professional knowledge, and skill. So perhaps eliciting the existing cognitions is a must, but cognitions are not static, and they can be changed. Minimizing mismatches between teachers' cognitions and practices. Well, in many cases, our teachers practice what they do not really believe in, and this is the limitation of the context. This is the pressure of the context. This is the only solution they can try. So we should give the students, the teachers, enough space to apply more creativity and try options which work in their schools, in their universities, and in their classrooms. Well, obviously, we should compensate for all burdens we put on teachers' shoulders, and job satisfaction should be given a priority in the list of administrative issues. Well, as I said, teacher learning is a much better candidate in the context of many countries, especially given the fact that people assume that ELT education is enough, and we don't need EAP education. We don't need EAP teacher education. Once teachers are well trained, they can adapt themselves to the requirements of EAP courses as well. And another suggestion I have is collaborating in curriculum planning and course design. The teachers should be involved. As I said, we have a very good experience in the context of Iran. we found that if teachers are given a role in the process of developing materials, their sense of collegiality improves and they feel responsible for the job. So in the department, we have at that state-run organization in charge of developing materials, we have launched a new agenda. In this new agenda, a content teacher and a language teacher should join to produce a material. We have a template for briefing day jobs. We have supervisors to help them in each and every stage of materials development. And we have found this very much rewarding because our teachers' sense of responsibility improves, and they spread the culture of collaboration in the departments, and they have a positive attitude to materials, and they use these materials. But once we impose the materials on them, even if the materials enjoy good quality standards and they're in line with the latest developments in English for academic purposes, they have a kind of resistance and hesitation to use them in their classroom. So in the long run, materials development is not just materials development, but it's a kind of workshop to spread these skills and the culture of teaching English for academic purposes. And we have tried this in Iran, and it was really fruitful. Yes, as I said, so experts should join teachers, and preferably big teams of teachers, not 2, 3, 4, 5 teachers. Maybe Tomlinson's model of teaming up comes to your mind, and that's a perfect model with my adaptation to English for academic purposes, materials development. And localizing EAP teaching methodologies. Well, in the context of Iran, translation and code switching is in teachers' blood. So we can't push them to change overnight. So it's too ambitious to change them into highly advanced expert teachers overnight. So we should adapt the teaching methodologies based on the established cognitions and role identities of the teachers. So there's no hope, there's no ray of hope for any overnight change in their mentality, in their teaching activities and classroom procedures. I remember when we developed those books, some colleagues said, well, translation is a thing of the past. Let's get rid of translation as an activity. But I said, well, why not putting translation as a kind of technique to improve students' awareness of textuality and genre and discourse? Why not using translation as a means to raise the students' interest in teaching corpus and dealing with the corpus, right? So highlighting certain key vocabularies in the context. Why not using translation as an activity to bridge the skills, I mean the oral skills and the written skills in the classrooms? And my final suggestion, which comes from the education camp, this camp, is listening to teachers' voices. If teachers missed, there's no hope for any change.